Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands as he finished repairing the mining station's oxygen recycler. The job had taken him 3 days in the cramped maintenance tunnels of Kepler Station, but finally the ancient machinery hummed with life again. Being the only human mechanic in this sector of the galaxy meant constant work, but Jake didn't mind. He had always been good with his hands, and machines made more sense to him than most people anyway. The salvage alert came through his comm unit, just as he was packing up his tools. A derelict ship had been detected drifting near the asteroid belt, and salvage crews were being dispatched. Jake volunteered immediately. Salvage work paid well, and he could always use spare parts for his workshop. The ship they found was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a small space station, with sleek curves and biomechanical features that seemed almost alive. The hull was scarred and blackened, clearly damaged from some ancient battle. Most salvage crews would have stripped it for valuable metals and moved on. But something about this ship called to Jake's curiosity. Inside, the vessel was a maze of organic corridors and chambers that pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent glow. The other salvagers focused on removing obvious valuables, but Jake found himself drawn deeper into the ship's heart. His portable scanner detected massive energy readings coming from the central chamber, though the power systems appeared to be offline. When Jake finally reached the core of the ship, he stopped in amazement. Suspended in the center of a vast chamber was a creature unlike anything in the known galaxy. It was easily 20 feet long with scales that shimmered between deep purple and silver. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could tear through starship hulls, and a long serpentine neck supported a head filled with razor-sharp teeth. Wings that could span 100 feet were folded against its body. This was clearly one of the legendary draconian species, the apex predators that had once terrorized entire star systems. But something was wrong. The creature was trapped in a complex restraint system that seemed to be draining its life force. Dozens of tubes and wires connected to its body, and Jake's scanner showed that its vital signs were barely registering. More disturbing were the obvious surgical scars along the creature's lower abdomen. Someone had performed crude surgery on this magnificent being. Jake approached carefully, his engineer's mind already analyzing the restraint system. The technology was advanced beyond anything he had seen, but he could recognize the basic principles. This wasn't just a prison. It was a torture device designed to keep the creature alive while slowly draining its strength and will to live. The dragon's eyes suddenly opened, fixing on Jake with an intelligence that took his breath away. They were a brilliant gold color but filled with pain and resignation. The creature didn't struggle or attempt to attack. It simply watched Jake with the tired gaze of something that had given up hope long ago. Jake's scanner revealed the truth. The surgical scars indicated that the creature had been neutered, its reproductive organs removed. For a proud species like the Draconians, this would be the ultimate humiliation. No wonder it looked so defeated. "What did they do to you?" Jake whispered, more to himself than to the creature. To his surprise, a voice echoed in his mind. Not words exactly, but concepts and emotions that his brain somehow translated into meaning. The dragon was telepathic, and despite its weakened state, it was still able to communicate. Pain, shame, 2,000 years of darkness. The Empress took everything, made me nothing. The mental voice was filled with such anguish that Jake actually stepped back, but his natural compassion quickly overcame his shock. He had always been drawn to fixing broken things, and this creature was the most broken thing he had ever encountered. "The Empress?" Jake asked aloud, not sure if the creature could understand his speech. Images flooded his mind. A beautiful but cruel alien woman with forearms and skin like polished marble, the Zephyrian Empress, ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. She collected rare and dangerous creatures like trophies, breaking them to her will through surgery and psychological torture. The dragon had once been her prized possession, a symbol of her power over even the mightiest predators in the galaxy. But the dragon had eventually displeased her somehow, and she had declared it useless. For 2 millennia, it had drifted in this biomechanical prison ship, forgotten and slowly dying. Jake studied the restraint system more carefully. The technology was incredibly advanced, but he began to see patterns. Energy flowed through specific conduits, and control systems monitored the creature's vital signs. Like any machine, it had weak points. "I think I can get you out of this," Jake said, surprised by his own words. The dragon's golden eyes widened slightly, and Jake felt a flicker of something that might have been hope touch his mind. But it was quickly replaced by resignation. You cannot. Many have tried. The chains cannot be broken by force or technology. Jake smiled grimly. Maybe not by alien technology, but I'm human. We do things differently. He began unpacking his tools, studying the energy patterns flowing through the restraint system. The dragon watched silently as Jake worked, occasionally sharing technical knowledge through their telepathic link. Despite being a biological creature, the dragon understood the ship's systems intimately after 20 centuries of confinement. Hours passed as Jake traced circuits and analyzed power flows. The other salvagers called for him several times, but he ignored them. This was more important than any salvage haul. He was going to free this magnificent creature, not for profit or glory, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As Jake worked, he began to understand more about the dragon's nature. Its name was Zarthok, and it had once been a proud warrior among its people. The Draconians were not merely predators, but a highly advanced civilization with their own code of honor. Zarthok had been captured during a battle to protect its world from the Empress's invasion fleet. The tragedy went deeper than mere imprisonment. By neutering Zarthok, the Empress had not only removed its ability to reproduce but had violated the very essence of what made it a dragon. In Draconian culture, the ability to create life was considered sacred, tied directly to their sense of identity and purpose. Jake's anger grew as he learned more about what had been done to this noble creature. The human concept of justice burned bright in his chest, fueling his determination to find a way to break these seemingly unbreakable bonds. Finally, after 8 hours of careful work, Jake found what he was looking for. The restraint system had a single critical vulnerability, a feedback loop in the biomonitoring system. If he could overload it at just the right moment, the entire system would shut down to prevent damage to its organic components. This is going to hurt, Jake warned as he prepared to execute his plan. Pain is nothing new, Zarthok replied. Do what you must, human mechanic. Jake took a deep breath and initiated his override sequence. Sparks flew from several control panels as the ship's biomechanical systems fought against his intrusion. The restraints around Zarthok began to pulse with angry red light, and the dragon's body convulsed as feedback surged through the neural connections. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought he had made everything worse. Zarthok's mental screams of agony echoed through his mind, and the creature's massive body thrashed against its bonds. But then, with a sound like breaking glass, the energy field surrounding the dragon collapsed. The restraints fell away one by one, mechanical arms retracting into the walls as the prison system finally shut down. Zarthok collapsed to the chamber floor with a crash that shook the entire ship. For several minutes, the dragon lay motionless, and Jake feared he had killed the creature in his attempt to save it. Then Zarthok's head lifted slowly, golden eyes focusing on Jake with wonder and disbelief. Free, the dragon whispered into Jake's mind. After 2,000 years, I am free. Jake approached cautiously as Zarthok struggled to stand. The dragon's legs shook from centuries of disuse, and it was clear that the creature was extremely weak. But there was something different in its eyes now, a spark of life that had been missing before. Easy there, big guy, Jake said, pulling a nutrient pack from his emergency supplies. You need to get your strength back slowly. Zarthok accepted the food gratefully, though Jake could sense the creature's embarrassment at its weakness. Dragons were proud beings, and being reduced to this state was almost as painful as the physical imprisonment had been. As Zarthok began to recover, Jake learned more about draconian biology. The dragon's body was incredibly resilient, designed to survive in the vacuum of space and withstand massive physical trauma. But the restraint system had been specifically designed to prevent this natural healing, keeping Zarthok in a state of perpetual weakness. Now, with the system disabled, the dragon's body began to remember what it was meant to be. Color returned to its scales, and its movements became more fluid and powerful. But Jake could see that the psychological damage would take much longer to heal. The other salvagers eventually came looking for Jake, and their reactions to Zarthok ranged from terror to amazement. Most species in the galaxy knew of the Draconians only as legends, stories of unstoppable predators who could destroy entire fleets single-handedly. To see one in person, even in its weakened state, was both thrilling and terrifying. But Jake noticed something the others missed. Zarthok's reaction to the other aliens was one of deep shame. The dragon tried to make itself smaller, hiding the surgical scars that marked its humiliation. Jake felt a surge of protective anger toward this broken warrior. "We need to get out of here," Jake announced. "This ship is going to attract attention, and not the good kind." He was right to be concerned. The biomechanical vessel was already broadcasting automated distress signals, calling for assistance from Zephyrian forces. If they stayed much longer, they would face the Empress's military, but Zarthok refused to leave the ship that had been its prison. "This vessel contains the remains of my people," the dragon explained. "When the Empress captured me, she brought the bodies of my fallen warriors as trophies. I cannot leave them here to be desecrated." Jake understood. He had seen the honor that drove Zarthok, the need to protect those who could no longer protect themselves. It was a very human sentiment, and it made Jake respect the dragon even more. Working together, they located the chamber where the Empress had stored her macabre collection. Dozens of draconian remains were preserved in stasis fields, their bodies frozen at the moment of death. Jake helped Zarthok perform the proper funeral rites, using the ship's energy systems to create the ceremonial fires that would send the warriors to their final rest. As the flames consumed the bodies of Zarthok's people, Jake saw tears flowing from the dragon's golden eyes. It was the first real emotion the creature had allowed itself to feel in centuries. "They died believing I would avenge them," Zarthok said. "Instead, I became a broken thing, a symbol of our defeat." "You survived," Jake replied firmly. "That takes its own kind of strength, and now you're free to decide what comes next." But their moment of mourning was interrupted by proximity alarms. 3 Zephyrian warships had detected the biomechanical vessel and were closing fast. The Empress might have forgotten about her discarded toy, but her military had standing orders to investigate any draconian activity. Jake knew they had to move quickly. The salvage ship he had arrived in was fast but lightly armed. Against 3 military vessels, they wouldn't stand a chance in a direct fight. But Jake had never believed in fighting fair anyway. He began setting charges throughout the biomechanical ship, turning the dragon's former prison into a massive bomb. The vessel's organic components would burn hot and bright, creating enough of a distraction to cover their escape. Zarthok watched these preparations with growing amazement. No one had ever risked so much to help the dragon, especially not someone who had nothing to gain from it. In draconian culture, such selfless courage was the highest virtue, and Jake was displaying it in abundance. "Why?" Zarthok asked as they prepared to board the salvage ship. "Why do you risk yourself for a broken creature like me?" Jake paused in his preparations, considering the question seriously. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be free," he said finally. "And because fixing broken things is what I do." They barely made it to the salvage ship before the Zephyrian vessels arrived. Jake fired his makeshift bomb just as the enemy ships were moving in to investigate, and the biomechanical vessel exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire asteroid belt. In the confusion, the small salvage ship slipped away, carrying Jake and Zarthok toward an uncertain future. The dragon was free for the first time in 2 millennia, but freedom brought its own challenges. As they traveled through hyperspace toward Jake's home base, Zarthok began to truly understand what the human had done for him. Not just the physical liberation, but something much more important. Jake had treated the dragon with dignity and respect when the rest of the galaxy saw only a broken monster. "I owe you a life debt," Zarthok declared. "By draconian law, I am bound to serve you until this debt is repaid." Jake laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "I don't want a servant," he said. "I want a friend." The concept was alien to Zarthok, who had known only masters and enemies for so long. But something in Jake's genuine smile made the dragon's heart lighter than it had been in centuries. Perhaps this human mechanic had given him something even more valuable than freedom: hope. As their ship continued through the vast darkness of space, both human and dragon began to realize that their meeting had changed everything. Jake had gained a companion unlike any other, and Zarthok had found someone who saw past his broken exterior to the warrior within. But neither of them knew that their escape had been detected by sensors aboard the Zephyrian flagship. The Empress might have forgotten about her old pet, but her generals remembered the dragon's power. They would not let such a valuable asset slip away so easily. The hunt was about to begin. Jake's workshop on the mining station Kepler was not designed for dragons. The main bay barely accommodated Zarthok's massive form, and the dragon had to keep its wings folded tightly to avoid knocking over equipment. But it was home, and for the first time in 2,000 years, Zarthok felt safe. The first weeks were difficult. Zarthok's body was healing rapidly now that it was free from the restraint system, but the dragon's mind struggled with concepts it had forgotten. Simple things like choosing when to eat or where to sleep became overwhelming decisions after centuries of having every aspect of life controlled. Jake watched patiently as his new companion grappled with freedom. The human had seen similar symptoms in rescued animals back on Earth, the confusion and fear that came with sudden liberation from captivity. But Zarthok was no animal. The dragon's intelligence was vast and ancient, and once it began to remember how to think independently, its recovery accelerated. The workshop became a place of learning for both of them. Jake taught Zarthok about modern technology and galactic politics, while the dragon shared knowledge of advanced sciences that its people had mastered millennia ago. Draconian engineering was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones, and Jake found himself fascinated by concepts he had never imagined. Working together, they began modifying Jake's equipment. Zarthok's natural ability to manipulate energy at the molecular level combined with Jake's practical engineering skills to create tools and machines that were far more advanced than anything either could have built alone. Their first collaborative project was a medical scanner that could detect and treat injuries at the cellular level. Jake used this device to get a complete picture of what had been done to Zarthok. The results made him angry all over again. The Empress's surgeons had been incredibly crude in their work, removing not just reproductive organs but also glands that regulated the dragon's natural aggression and territorial instincts. It was a deliberate attempt to break Zarthok's spirit by attacking the very essence of what made it a dragon. But Jake also discovered something the Empress's people had missed. Deep within Zarthok's body, protected by redundant biological systems, were genetic templates that could potentially restore what had been taken. The dragon's people had evolved sophisticated backup systems to survive in hostile environments, and some of those systems were still intact. "It is impossible," Zarthok protested when Jake explained his findings. The Empress's surgeons were thorough. They would not have missed something so important. "They were looking with alien eyes," Jake replied. "Sometimes an outsider can see things that experts miss." Jake began researching draconian biology with the intensity of an obsessed scientist. He contacted xenobiologists across the galaxy, trading favors and calling in debts to access restricted databases. Slowly, he began to understand the incredible complexity of dragon physiology. The breakthrough came when Jake realized that draconian regeneration worked differently than any other species. Instead of simply healing damage, dragons could actually rebuild themselves from genetic templates stored throughout their bodies. The templates were activated by specific biochemical triggers that the dragon's mind controlled. The problem was that Zarthok had forgotten how to access these systems. 2,000 years of psychological torture had severed the mental pathways that controlled regeneration. But with patience and the right guidance, those pathways could be rebuilt. Jake began working with Zarthok on meditation and mental exercises designed to reconnect the dragon with its own body. It was frustrating work, as Zarthok had been conditioned to suppress its natural instincts for so long that accessing them felt dangerous and wrong. The first breakthrough came during a routine maintenance job. Jake was repairing a plasma conduit when it suddenly overloaded, filling the workshop with dangerous radiation. Without thinking, Zarthok instinctively generated an energy field that protected them both from the deadly exposure. "I did not know I could still do that," Zarthok said in wonder, staring at its own claws as energy crackled between them. "Your body remembers," Jake replied. "You just have to trust it." From that moment forward, Zarthok began recovering abilities it had thought lost forever. The dragon's scales regained their natural shimmer. Its strength increased dramatically, and its telepathic abilities expanded beyond simple communication to include sensing emotions and intentions at great distances. But the most dramatic change was in Zarthok's personality. As the dragon reconnected with its instincts, it began to display traits that had been suppressed for millennia. There was a fierce joy in simple things like flying through asteroid fields or solving complex engineering problems. Zarthok laughed for the first time in 2,000 years, a sound like rolling thunder that shook the entire workshop. Jake found himself both delighted and occasionally intimidated by his friend's transformation. This was what a dragon was supposed to be, a force of nature given intelligence and will. The broken creature he had rescued was evolving back into one of the galaxy's apex predators. Their work together attracted attention from other residents of Kepler Station. Word spread that the human mechanic had somehow tamed a dragon, and people came from across the sector to see this impossible partnership. Most were amazed by what they witnessed, human and dragon working in perfect harmony, combining their different strengths to achieve things neither could accomplish alone. But not all the attention was welcome. Reports of Zarthok's presence began reaching ears in the Zephyrian Empire. The Empress might have dismissed her former pet as worthless, but her military commanders knew better. A fully recovered dragon was a weapon that could turn the tide of any conflict, and they began making plans to reclaim their lost asset, Jake. And Zarthok were working on their latest project, a new type of starship engine that combined human fusion technology with draconian energy manipulation. When the first assassins arrived, they came disguised as customers seeking repairs, but Zarthok's enhanced telepathic abilities detected their hostile intentions long before they could act. The attack was swift and brutal. The assassins were equipped with weapons specifically designed to incapacitate dragons, neural disruptors that could overwhelm even Zarthok's powerful mind. But they had underestimated both the dragon's recovery and Jake's resourcefulness. Jake activated the workshop's security systems while Zarthok dealt with the immediate threat. The dragon moved with a speed and grace that left the assassins stunned. This was not the broken creature they had expected to find, but a fully awakened apex predator defending its territory. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized. But Jake and Zarthok both knew that this was only the beginning. The Empress would send more assassins than military forces, and eventually she might come herself to reclaim what she considered her property. "I have brought danger to you and this place," Zarthok said, guilt evident in its mental voice. "Perhaps I should leave before others are hurt." "Running won't solve anything," Jake replied firmly. "Besides, you're not property anymore. You're a free being, and free beings don't have to hide from bullies." Jake began making preparations for the larger conflict he knew was coming. He contacted old friends in the human military and various mercenary organizations, calling in favors and hiring protection. He also began upgrading the station's defenses, using the new technologies he and Zarthok had developed. But the dragon had its own ideas about how to handle the situation. For the first time since its liberation, Zarthok began to truly remember what it had been before its capture. Not just a powerful creature, but a warrior and leader among its people. "There is something you should know about dragons," Zarthok told Jake as they prepared for war. "We do not simply fight to defend ourselves. We fight to protect what we consider ours, and you, Jake Morrison, are mine to protect." The possessiveness in the dragon's mental voice might have been frightening to some, but Jake found it oddly comforting. He had gained more than just a friend or even an ally. He had earned the loyalty of one of the galaxy's most formidable beings. As reports came in of Zephyrian ships gathering at the edge of the system, Jake realized that their quiet life of research and discovery was about to end. The Empress was coming to reclaim her lost pet, but she would find instead a fully awakened dragon ready to fight for its freedom, and a human mechanic who had never learned to back down from a worthy cause. The Zephyrian battle fleet arrived 3 days later, emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system like a swarm of metallic predators. 12 heavy cruisers and dozens of smaller vessels took positions around the mining station, their weapons trained on the small outpost that had become the center of galactic attention. Admiral Kethavar commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed every other ship in the formation. He was a veteran of countless campaigns, his forearms scarred from battles across the galaxy. But even he felt a flutter of nervousness as he studied the tactical displays. Somewhere on that insignificant mining station was a creature that had once been capable of destroying entire fleets single-handedly. "Send the surrender demand," he ordered his communications officer. "Standard terms. They hand over the dragon and we leave the station intact." The response came not from station command, but from Jake Morrison himself. The human's image appeared on the flagship's main screen, showing a surprisingly young man with grease-stained coveralls and an expression of mild annoyance. "You're blocking my shipping lanes," Jake said without preamble. "Move your fleet or I'll file a complaint with the Galactic Trade Commission." Admiral Kethvar felt his blood pressure rising. "Human, you are harboring stolen property of the Zephyrian Empire. Surrender the dragon immediately or we will take it by force." "Stolen property?" Jake laughed, the sound carrying easily across the communication link. "That's funny. Last I checked, slavery was illegal in this sector. You want Zarthok, you can ask him yourself." The screen split and suddenly the Admiral found himself face to face with nightmares from his childhood. Zarthok's golden eyes filled the display, ancient and terrible and very much awake. The dragon's mental voice echoed across every ship in the fleet, carried by psionic abilities that had grown far beyond their original strength. "I am no one's property," Zarthok declared. "Leave this place or face the consequences of your arrogance." Several junior officers on the bridge actually stumbled backward from their stations, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the dragon's consciousness pressing against their minds. Admiral Kethvar himself felt sweat beading on his forehead, as primal fear warred with military discipline. But he was a veteran of too many campaigns to be intimidated by psychological warfare. "You were broken once before, Beast. We can break you again." Zarthok's laughter was like the sound of worlds ending. "I am not the creature you remember. I have been reborn in fire and fury, guided by human hands and human heart. Come and face what you have created." The communication ended abruptly, leaving the Admiral staring at a blank screen. Around him, his officers waited for orders, their faces pale but determined. They were professional soldiers, and they would follow their commander into battle regardless of their personal fears. "Begin the assault," Admiral Kethvar commanded. "All ships target the station's defensive systems. Capture protocols are in effect. We want the dragon alive if possible." The first wave of missiles streaked across space toward Kepler Station, expecting to encounter the standard defensive shields of a mining outpost. Instead, they struck energy barriers that had never been seen before in galactic warfare. The barriers didn't simply absorb the incoming fire. They converted it into pure energy and redirected it back at the attacking ships. 3 Zephyrian cruisers found themselves suddenly under attack by their own weapons, their shields overloading as redirected plasma bolts struck home. The formation wavered as ship captains tried to understand what they were facing. "Impossible," Admiral Kethvar muttered, studying the sensor readings. "Those defensive systems shouldn't exist." On Kepler Station, Jake watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The shield generators he and Zarthok had built were performing exactly as designed, using principles that combined human engineering with draconian energy manipulation. The attacking fleet was about to learn that there were technologies in the galaxy they had never imagined. Phase 2, Jake announced over the station's communication system. Zarthok emerged from the station's main hangar bay like a comet given life. The dragon's scales blazed with contained energy, and its massive wings spread wide as it accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet. For the first time in 2,000 years, a dragon flew free in open space, and the sight struck terror into the hearts of every enemy soldier who witnessed it. The smaller escort ships opened fire immediately, filling space with energy beams and projectile weapons. But Zarthok was no longer the weakened creature they remembered from their files. The dragon wove between incoming fire with impossible grace, its body generating force fields that deflected anything it couldn't dodge. Zarthok struck the first cruiser like a living battering ram, claws tearing through armor plating that was supposed to be impenetrable. The ship's hull buckled and cracked as the dragon landed on its surface, energy pouring from its body into the vessel's critical systems. Inside the cruiser, chaos reigned as power fluctuations cascaded through every deck. Emergency lights flickered and died as Zarthok's bioelectric field interfered with the ship's electronics. The crew found themselves fighting not just a physical threat, but a creature that could disrupt their technology simply by being near it. Admiral Kethvar watched in growing horror as his fleet's formation began to collapse. This was not the broken creature his intelligence reports had described. This was a fully awakened dragon, and it was demonstrating why his people had once feared these beings above all others. "All ships, concentrate fire on the dragon," he ordered. "Ignore the station for now." But even as every weapon in the fleet turned toward Zarthok, Jake was implementing the next phase of their defense. The station's communication array had been modified with draconian psionic amplifiers, and now it broadcast a signal that no military scanner could detect. Across the galaxy, other dragons felt the call. Most had been in hiding for centuries, afraid to reveal themselves after the Empress's campaigns of extermination. But Zarthok's message was clear. One of their own had found freedom, and the time for hiding was over. The first to arrive was Veltar, an ancient female who had been sleeping in the core of a dead moon for 300 years. Her scales were deep emerald green, and her telepathic abilities were even stronger than Zarthok's. She emerged from hyperspace just as the Zephyrian fleet was beginning to overwhelm the station's defenses. More dragons followed. Ketmon the Stormcaller, whose control over electromagnetic fields could disable entire fleets. Nargoth the Void Ripper, who could tear holes in space-time itself. And others, each a legend thought lost to history. Admiral Keithvar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief as dragon after dragon appeared on his sensors. His intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. There weren't just a few dragons left in the galaxy. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds, and they were all converging on his position. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking with fear, "I'm reading 17 distinct dragon signatures, with more appearing every minute. Recommend immediate withdrawal." But retreat was not an option. The Admiral knew that returning to the Empress empty-handed would be a death sentence. Better to die in battle than face her wrath. "All ships prepare for full assault," he commanded. "We came here to reclaim Imperial property. We will not leave without it." The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when dragons reclaimed their place in galactic history. For too long they had hidden, afraid and broken by the Empress's campaigns. But Jake Morrison's simple act of compassion had awakened something that had been sleeping in their collective soul. As energy beams crisscrossed the darkness between ships and dragons, as ancient predators faced modern weapons in a dance of destruction and survival, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The age of human dominance in space was about to face its first real challenge. But perhaps more importantly, the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened something a dragon considered family. Jake Morrison had freed Zarthok from physical bondage, but in doing so, he had also freed the dragon from the psychological chains that had kept its people in hiding. The Empress's fleet had come to reclaim one broken pet. Instead, they found themselves facing a dragon renaissance, led by a human mechanic who had never learned that some things were supposed to be impossible. The battle for Kepler Station lasted 18 hours and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. What began as a simple retrieval mission for the Zephyrian fleet became a nightmare of ancient fury, unleashed upon modern warfare. 17 dragons fought as one, their telepathic abilities allowing them to coordinate attacks with a precision that no military force could match. They moved through space like living weapons, each one adapting their combat style to complement the others. Zarthok led them with the tactical brilliance of a creature who had studied warfare for millennia, while the others brought their own specialized abilities to bear. Veltar, the ancient emerald female, demonstrated why dragons had once been feared as ship killers. Her bioelectric fields interfaced directly with enemy vessel computer systems, turning their own weapons against them. Entire squadrons of Zephyrian fighters suddenly found themselves firing on their own motherships as Veltar hijacked their targeting systems. Ketmon, the Stormcaller, lived up to his name by generating electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronics across multiple ships simultaneously. His deep blue scales crackled with contained lightning as he wove between enemy formations, leaving a trail of dead vessels in his wake. But it was Nargoth the Void Ripper who truly terrified the Zephyrian fleet. The massive black dragon could manipulate space-time itself, creating temporary wormholes that allowed his allies to appear behind enemy lines, or causing sections of enemy ships to simply disappear into dimensional voids. His abilities were so advanced that even other dragons watched him with awe. Admiral Keithvar fought desperately to maintain some semblance of tactical control, but his fleet was being systematically dismantled by creatures that operated on principles his military training had never prepared him for. These weren't just powerful animals. They were ancient intelligences with access to technologies that made his most advanced weapons look primitive. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we've lost contact with 7 cruisers. The Valiant and the Destroyer are reporting critical system failures. The dragons are inside their hulls somehow. The Admiral could see it happening on his tactical display. Dragon biosignatures appearing inside his ships, moving through corridors and engineering sections like ghosts made manifest. His crew was trained to fight external threats, not intruders who could phase through solid matter or disable entire decks with their presence. But Jake Morrison was learning something equally important during the battle. As he watched the dragons fight, he began to understand the true scope of what had been lost when the Empress began her campaigns of extermination. These weren't just individual creatures. They were the scattered remnants of a civilization that had once spanned the galaxy. Through his connection with Zarthok, Jake experienced fragments of memories from other dragons. He saw star systems where draconian architecture grew like living crystal from the surfaces of planets. He witnessed scientific achievements that had unlocked the secrets of consciousness itself. He felt the collective grief of a people who had watched their culture burned away by imperial ambition. "Now you begin to understand," Zarthok communicated as the dragon ripped apart another Zephyrian cruiser. "We were not merely predators. We were builders, teachers, explorers. The Empress destroyed not just our bodies but the accumulated wisdom of millions of years." Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he experienced the depth of what had been lost. But he also felt something else, a burning determination to help these magnificent beings reclaim their heritage. "Can it be rebuilt?" he asked through their mental link. "With time and will, anything can be rebuilt," Zarthok replied. "But first we must ensure that there is time. The Empress will not accept this defeat. She will come herself, and when she does, even our combined strength may not be enough." The battle was turning decisively in favor of the dragons, but Jake knew they needed more than military victory. They needed a symbol, something that would inspire other dragons across the galaxy to emerge from hiding and reclaim their birthright. That symbol came in the form of Admiral Kethvar himself. The Zephyrian commander had ordered his flagship to ram Kepler Station in a final desperate attack, but Zarthok intercepted the massive vessel before it could complete its suicidal run. The dragon latched onto the dreadnought's hull and began systematically dismantling its weapon systems, while the crew could only watch in helpless terror. Then, instead of destroying the ship, Zarthok did something unprecedented. The dragon phase shifted through the hull and appeared on the bridge, its massive form somehow fitting into a space far too small to contain it. The crew scrambled for weapons but found their energy rifles had no effect on the dragon's energy-charged scales. "I could kill you all in moments," Zarthok communicated to every mind on the bridge. But I choose not to. Return to your Empress with this message. The age of dragon slavery is over. We are free, we are united, and we will defend ourselves against any who would chain us again." Admiral Kethvar stared into the dragon's golden eyes and saw his own death reflected there. But he also saw mercy, and that mercy was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. This creature could have ended his life without effort, yet chose to let him live. It was a demonstration of power more complete than any act of destruction. The Admiral nodded slowly, understanding that he was witnessing history. "I will carry your message," he said formally. Zarthok vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the bridge crew staring at empty air. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading as the remaining Zephyrian ships received orders to withdraw. The victory celebration on Kepler Station was unlike anything in galactic history. 17 dragons, each the size of a small ship, somehow managed to fit into Jake's workshop while maintaining an atmosphere of dignified celebration. They communicated in harmonics that made the station's hull ring like a bell, sharing stories and memories that had been suppressed for centuries. Jake found himself at the center of it all, the human who had sparked a renaissance simply by refusing to leave a broken creature in its cage. The dragons treated him with a respect usually reserved for their own elders, recognizing that his compassion had made their reunion possible. But the celebration was tinged with sorrow as well. As the dragons shared their stories, it became clear how few of them remained. Where once millions had soared through the galaxy's spiral arms, perhaps only a few hundred had survived the Empress's extermination campaigns. They were the remnants of a dying civilization, clinging to existence in the margins of galactic society. "We have hidden for so long that we almost forgot what we were," Veltar confided to Jake. "Your courage in freeing Zarthok has reminded us. But now we face a choice. Remain hidden and slowly fade away, or stand together and fight for our right to exist? The choice was unanimous. Every dragon present pledged to emerge from hiding and reclaim their place in the galaxy. They would find their scattered kin, rebuild their culture, and defend themselves against any who would enslave them again. But they also recognized that this renaissance needed to be built on something stronger than just military might. The dragons had once been a civilization of scientists, philosophers, and artists as well as warriors. To truly reclaim their heritage, they would need to rediscover those other aspects of their nature. Jake found himself appointed as an unlikely cultural advisor, helping the dragons understand how galactic society had changed during their centuries of hiding. In return, they began sharing their accumulated knowledge with him, teaching him sciences and technologies that human civilization had never imagined. The workshop on Kepler Station became the unofficial embassy between human and dragon cultures, a place where two very different forms of intelligence could meet and learn from each other.
Jake's simple mechanical skills
Evolved into something approaching art as he learned to work with living metals and biomechanical systems that responded to thought, as much as physical manipulation. But even as they celebrated their victory and planned for the future, everyone knew that the real test was yet to come. Admiral Kethavar was already on his way back to the Imperial capital, carrying news of the dragon awakening to the one being in the galaxy who had reason to fear it most. The Empress had spent 2 millennia building an empire on the bones of the dragon civilization. She had turned their scattered remains into trophies and their survivors into broken pets. Now those pets were free, they had found each other, and they remembered what they had once been. The coming war would determine whether the galaxy had room for both human ambition and dragon renaissance, or whether one would have to destroy the other to survive. But as Jake looked around at the magnificent beings who now called him friend, he knew one thing for certain: the age of easy conquest was over. The dragons were awake, and they would never be caged again. The Zephyrian Imperial Palace was a monument to conquest, its crystalline spires reaching toward the stars like grasping fingers. Built from the fossilized remains of 1,000 extinct species, it served as both the seat of power and a reminder of what happened to those who opposed the Empress's will. In the throne chamber's heart, Empress Zalara received Admiral Kethavar's report with the cold fury of a star going nova. Her forearms remained perfectly still as she listened, but the temperature in the vast hall dropped several degrees as her biokinetic abilities responded to her rage. 17 dragons, she repeated, her voice like ice cracking. You tell me that 17 dragons appeared to defend a single human mechanic and a pet I discarded 2 millennia ago? Admiral Kethavar knelt before the throne, his battle-scarred form trembling not from fear but from the psychic pressure radiating from his sovereign. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. The creature we knew as your broken trophy has somehow recovered its full abilities. More troubling, it appears to have become a rallying point for other survivors. The Empress rose from her throne, her marble-white skin gleaming in the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. At 12 feet tall, she towered over even her largest subjects, and her presence filled the space like a living force of nature. She had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for over 3,000 years, expanding its borders through conquest and intimidation until it encompassed a quarter of the galaxy. Impossible, she declared. I broke that creature personally. Its spirit was shattered beyond repair. Your Imperial Majesty, the Admiral said carefully. Perhaps the dragon was not as broken as we believed. The human who freed it seems to have triggered some form of psychological healing. Our intelligence suggests that this Jake Morrison has become a focal point for dragon activity across multiple sectors. The Empress's 4 eyes blazed with inner fire as she processed this information. She had spent centuries perfecting the art of breaking dragon spirits, learning exactly which injuries would heal and which would leave permanent psychological scars. The idea that a mere human could undo her work was both impossible and infuriating, but she was too intelligent to dismiss the evidence entirely. If dragons were indeed emerging from hiding, rallying around her former pet and its human liberator, then the threat was real and immediate. Her empire was built on the foundation of dragon defeat. If they regained their strength and unity, everything she had built could crumble. Tell me about this human, she commanded, Admiral Kethvar activated a holographic display showing Jake's image and service record. Jake Morrison, age 34, former Human Defense Force engineer specializing in salvage and repair operations. No family, no political connections, no apparent reason for his actions beyond simple compassion. The Empress studied the human's face with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Jake Morrison looked completely ordinary, just another member of the young species that had recently entered galactic politics. Yet somehow this unremarkable individual had accomplished what her greatest enemies had failed to do for 2,000 years. Compassion, she mused, the word dripping with disdain. Such a weakness among the younger species. They cannot comprehend that mercy is simply another form of delayed cruelty. But even as she spoke, the Empress felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. Her empire was built on the principle that superior force could overcome any resistance. She had proven this by crushing the dragon civilization and reducing its survivors to broken pets. Yet now those same pets were free and united, all because of one human's refusal to accept the natural order. Your Imperial Majesty, Admiral Kethvar continued, our intelligence networks report unusual activity in sectors where dragons were previously detected. Ships are converging on the human's location from across the galaxy. We estimate that within a month, dozens more dragons could join the group at Kepler Station. The implications were staggering. During their height, the dragons had possessed technology that made them nearly unstoppable in individual combat. A single dragon could disable an entire fleet, and they had the tactical intelligence to coordinate their efforts effectively. If even 50 dragons reunited, they would pose a threat to the Empire's stability. But the Empress had not built her power through fear alone. She began issuing orders with the calm efficiency of someone who had orchestrated countless campaigns of conquest. Activate all assets in the border sectors, she commanded. I want every dragon hunter squadron deployed to intercept incoming vessels before they can reach the human station. Deploy the pacification fleet to establish a quarantine zone around the entire system. Admiral Kethvar nodded, making notes on his tactical display. The pacification fleet was the Empire's most feared weapon, a collection of ships specifically designed to break planetary resistance through systematic terror. Its deployment against a single mining station would be massive overkill under normal circumstances. Furthermore, the Empress continued, activate Project Mindbreak. It's time to test our new psychological warfare systems under combat conditions. The Admiral paused in his note-taking, clearly disturbed by this order. Project Mindbreak was a classified weapons program that used advanced psionics to attack the mental stability of enemy forces. It had been tested only on prisoners and volunteers, never deployed in actual combat. Your Imperial Majesty, he said carefully, the Project Mindbreak systems have not been fully tested. Using them against dragons could have unpredictable consequences. The Empress's laugh was like breaking glass. Admiral, dragons are the test. If our psychological weapons cannot break creatures who were already broken once before, then they are useless anyway. But even as she planned her military response, the Empress was already considering a more personal approach to the problem. The dragon that had escaped her control was not just any creature. It was Zarthok, once the pride of her collection and the most intelligent of her pets. She had spent decades studying its psychology, learning every fear and weakness that could be exploited. Perhaps it was time for a more direct approach. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other dragons felt the call that Zarthok had sent out. Most had been in hiding for so long that they had almost forgotten what freedom felt like. But the mental beacon broadcasting from Kepler Station awakened memories that had been dormant for centuries. On a dead world in the Outer Rim, the ancient dragon Mordain emerged from a cave where he had slept for 400 years. His scales were black as the void between stars, and his psychic abilities had grown strong in isolation. He felt Zarthok's call like a song in his ancient heart, and for the first time in centuries, he spread his wings and took to space. In the asteroid belt of a forgotten system, 3 sister dragons who had hidden themselves as space rocks suddenly came alive. Silandra, Nixera, and Velanya had survived by making themselves appear dead. But now they revealed their true forms and began the long journey to answer their brother's call. Even in the deepest reaches of the galactic core, where radiation levels would kill most life forms, the legendary Pyrrhion felt the summons. This eldest of all dragons had been sleeping in the heart of a neutron star for a millennium, But Zarthok's message reached even there. Slowly, carefully, Pyrrhion began to extract itself from the stellar furnace that had been its refuge. Each dragon that awakened faced the same choice: remain hidden and safe, or risk everything to join their kin in reclaiming their birthright. The choice was never really in doubt. Dragons were not a species that cowered in darkness while their family fought alone. Back on Kepler Station, Jake was beginning to understand the magnitude of what his simple act of compassion had unleashed. Through his connection with Zarthok, he could sense the approaching dragons like distant stars growing brighter. Each one carried with it memories of loss and suffering, but also hope for the first time in centuries. "How many do you think will come?" Jake asked as he worked alongside Zarthok to upgrade the station's defenses. "All of them," Zarthok replied without hesitation. "Every dragon still alive will hear the call and come. We are not a people who abandon family no matter the cost." Jake felt a chill of apprehension.
And how many is that exactly?
The dragon paused in its work, golden eyes distant as it reached out with psychic senses that spanned the galaxy. "More than the Empress fears, but fewer than we need. Perhaps 200 scattered across all known space. We are the last echoes of a civilization that once numbered in the millions." The weight of that number settled on Jake's shoulders like a physical burden. 200 dragons against an empire that commanded thousands of worlds and millions of ships. The odds were overwhelming, but Jake had never been one to back down from impossible challenges. "Then we'd better make sure those 200 count for something," he said, returning to his work with renewed determination. Neither human nor dragon knew that high above them, cloaked ships were already taking positions around the system. The Empress had decided that if she could not reclaim her pet, she would ensure that no one else could benefit from its freedom. The final battle for dragon liberation was about to begin, and this time the Empress herself was coming to oversee the destruction of the rebellion that had dared to challenge her eternal reign. The Empress arrived at the edge of the Kepler system aboard her personal flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a vessel the size of a small moon and bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire planets. Behind her came the largest fleet in Zephyrian history, over 3,000 ships, representing the combined military might of a quarter of the galaxy. But she was not the only one who had been preparing for this final confrontation. In the 3 weeks since Admiral Kethvar's defeat, dragons had been arriving at Kepler Station from every corner of known space. They came alone or in small groups, each carrying the scars of centuries in hiding, but burning with renewed purpose. Jake's workshop had become the center of the largest gathering of dragons in 2 millennia. 197 dragons now occupied the space around Kepler Station, their massive forms creating a constellation of living stars. Each was unique. Some bore scales of deep emerald or sapphire blue, others shimmered with silver or gold, and a few radiated the deep black of the void itself. They were the survivors, the stubborn remnants of a civilization that had refused to die quietly. Jake stood in the station's observation deck, watching the dragons prepare for battle with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. These magnificent beings were about to risk everything for the simple right to exist freely, and it was his fault they were in danger. "Having second thoughts?" Zarthok asked, the dragon's mental voice gentle with understanding. "Every day," Jake admitted. "Maybe I should have left you in that prison ship. At least then the others would still be safe." "Safety in chains is not life," Zarthok replied firmly. "You gave me something more precious than safety. You gave me hope, and through me you gave it to all of us." The dragon's massive head turned toward the approaching fleet, golden eyes reflecting the distant lights of enemy ships. "Besides, this confrontation was inevitable. The Empress would never have allowed us to remain free once she learned we still existed. At least now we face her united instead of being hunted down one by one." Jake nodded, understanding the logic even if his human conscience struggled with the guilt. He had started this conflict, but he was also the only one who might be able to end it without total annihilation on both sides. Over the past weeks, Jake and the dragons had been working frantically to prepare defenses that could withstand the Empress's overwhelming force. The station itself had been transformed into a fortress unlike anything in galactic history, its hull reinforced with biomechanical armor that could repair itself and its weapon systems powered by dragon bioelectricity. But their greatest achievement was the network of modified communication, arrays that now linked every dragon in the system. Using principles that combined human engineering with ancient draconian psionic techniques, Jake had created a system that allowed all the dragons to share thoughts and coordinate actions as if they were a single organism. The effect was transformative. Where individual dragons had once been powerful but isolated, the linked network created something approaching a collective consciousness. They could anticipate each other's actions, share energy and healing across impossible distances, and coordinate tactical maneuvers with precision that no military force could match. The Empress studied the tactical displays with growing unease as her fleet approached the rebel position. Her sensors detected far more dragons than intelligence had suggested, and their energy readings were off the charts. Somehow, the creatures had found a way to amplify their natural abilities beyond anything in the historical records. "Your Imperial Majesty," her fleet commander reported, "we're detecting massive energy buildup around the station. The dragons appear to be linked in some form of collective network." "Impossible," the Empress replied, but her tone held a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. "Dragons are solitary creatures. They cannot form lasting mental bonds." But even as she spoke, she could see the evidence on her displays. The dragons moved in perfect coordination, their energy fields overlapping and reinforcing each other in patterns that should have been chaotic, but instead created a harmony that was beautiful and terrifying to behold for the first time in 3,000 years. Empress Zalara felt genuine fear. The battle began when the Empress activated Project Mindbreak, unleashing psychic weapons designed to shatter the mental stability of enemy forces. Waves of telepathic interference swept across the system, targeting the dragon's consciousness with precisely tuned frequencies meant to trigger psychological collapse. The attack might have worked against individual dragons, but the collective network Jake had helped create proved to be an unexpected defense. The psychic assault struck the linked consciousness and was absorbed, distributed among nearly 200 minds until its impact was negligible. Instead of breaking the dragon's spirits, the attack only strengthened their resolve. "She still thinks we are the broken creatures she once knew." Zarthok communicated across the network. "Show her what we have become." The dragons struck back with their own psychic assault, but this one was nothing like the crude mental bludgeoning of Zephyrian weapons. This was art given lethal form, a symphony of consciousness that swept across the enemy fleet like a wave of liquid starlight. Aboard 3,000 ships, Zephyrian crew members suddenly found themselves experiencing memories that were not their own. They felt the joy of soaring through nebulae on wings of living energy, the satisfaction of solving cosmic mysteries through pure thought, the deep contentment of civilizations built on harmony rather than conquest. For most of the crews, the experience was overwhelming but not destructive. They simply stood transfixed, experiencing what it meant to be truly free for the first time in their lives. But for the command staff, trained to resist mental intrusion, the dragon memories created a different effect: doubt. Officers who had spent their careers enforcing the Empress's will suddenly found themselves questioning the righteousness of their cause. They had been taught that dragons were mindless predators, threats to civilized space that had to be destroyed for the greater good. But the memories flowing through their minds showed them beings of incredible intelligence and compassion, creators rather than destroyers. The Empress watched in horror as her fleet's coordination began to collapse. Ship captains hesitated before following attack orders, and some vessels simply stopped responding to commands entirely. Her perfect military machine was being undermined not by superior firepower but by truth. "All ships, ignore the mental intrusions and focus fire on the station," she commanded, her voice carrying the psychic compulsion that had made her feared across the galaxy. But even her direct mental commands were being filtered through the dragon network, their coercive power diluted until they carried no more force than suggestions. For the first time in millennia, the Empress found herself truly powerless to command absolute obedience. The space battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Dragons flowed through the void like living poetry, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision yet flowing with organic grace. They struck at enemy ships not with crude violence but with surgical skill, disabling weapons and engines while leaving life support systems intact. Jake watched from the station's command center, serving as the human interface for systems that responded as much to thought as to physical control. Through his connection with Zarthok, He could feel the collective consciousness of the dragons as they fought, not for conquest or dominance, but simply for the right to exist. The turning point came when the ancient dragon Pyrrhion arrived from the galactic core. The eldest of all dragons emerged from hyperspace like a small star given life, its scales radiating heat that could be felt across the entire battlefield. Pyrrhion was less a creature than a force of nature, old beyond counting and wise beyond measure. Enough. Pyrrhion's mental voice echoed across the system, carrying such authority that even the Empress felt compelled to listen. This conflict serves no one. We seek only to live in peace, not to challenge your empire. The Empress materialized on Kepler Station's main hangar bay, using transportation technology that bent space itself around her will. She stood before the assembled dragons in her full regalia, 12 feet of marble perfection clothed in robes that captured and held starlight. Peace, she laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. You are weapons of war given consciousness. There can be no peace while you exist to threaten civilized space. Jake stepped forward, feeling absurdly small beside these titans, but determined to speak his piece. They're not weapons, he said firmly. They're people. They have the same right to exist as anyone else in the galaxy. The Empress turned her four-eyed gaze on the human who had started this rebellion, and Jake felt the full weight of her psychic presence pressing against his mind. But Zarthok's mental shields protected him, and he stood firm under her scrutiny. You, she said with infinite disdain, are the architect of this chaos. One human's misguided compassion has destabilized an empire that has maintained peace for 3,000 years. Peace built on slavery isn't peace, Jake replied. It's just delayed war. The confrontation might have continued, but Pyrrhion's ancient voice cut through their argument with words that carried the weight of cosmic truth.